Is it not possible that if the people whose convictions now give it an irresistible momentum began to see what only a few yet apprehend, they would recoil in horror and abandon the quest which for half a century has engaged so many people of goodwill? Where these common beliefs of our generation will lead us is a problem not for one party, but for every one of us, a problem of the most momentous significance. Is there a greater tragedy imaginable than that, in our endeavor consciously to shape our future in accordance with high ideals, we should, in fact, unwittingly produce the very opposite of what we have been striving for? There is an even more pressing reason why, at this time, we should seriously endeavor to understand the forces which have created National Socialism, that this will enable us to understand our enemy and the issue at stake between us. It cannot be denied that there is yet little recognition of the positive ideals for which we are fighting. We know that we are fighting for freedom to shape our life according to our own ideas. That is a great deal, but not enough. It is not enough to give us the firm beliefs which we need to resist an enemy who uses propaganda as one of his main weapons, not only in the most blatant, but also in the most subtle forms. It is still more insufficient when we have to counter this propaganda among the people in the countries under his control and elsewhere, where the effect of this propaganda will not disappear with the defeat of the Axis powers. It is not enough if we are to show to others that what we are fighting for is worth their support, and it is not enough to guide us in the building of a new world, safe against the dangers to which the old one has succumbed. It is a lamentable fact that the democracies, in their dealings with the dictators before the war, not less than in their attempts at propaganda and in the discussion of their war aims, have shown an inner insecurity and uncertainty of aim, which can be explained only by confusion about their own ideals and the nature of the differences which separated them from the enemy. We have been misled as much because we have refused to believe that the enemy was sincere in the profession of some beliefs which we shared, as because we believed in the sincerity of some of his other claims. Have not the parties of the left, as well as those of the right, been deceived by believing that the National Socialist Party was in the service of the capitalists and opposed to all forms of socialism? How many features of Hitler's system have not been recommended to us for imitation from the most unexpected quarters, unaware that they are an integral part of that system and incompatible with the free society we hope to preserve? The number of dangerous mistakes we have made before and since the outbreak of war, because we do not understand the opponent with whom we are faced, is appalling. It seems almost as if we did not want to understand the development which has produced totalitarianism, because such an understanding might destroy some of the dearest illusions to which we are determined to cling. We shall never be successful in our dealings with the Germans until we understand the character and the growth of the ideas which now govern them. The theory which is once again put forth, that the Germans as such are inherently vicious, is hardly tenable, and not very creditable, to those who hold it. It dishonors the long series of Anglo-Saxon thinkers who, during the last 100 years, have gladly taken over what was best, and not only what was best, in German thought. It overlooks the fact that, when 80 years ago John Stuart Mill was writing his great essay On Liberty, he drew his inspiration, more than from any other men, from two Germans, Goethe and Wilhelm von Humboldt, and forgets the fact that two of the most influential intellectual forebears of National Socialism, Thomas Carlyle and Houston Stewart Chamberlain, were a Scot and an Englishman. In its cruder forms, this view is a disgrace to those who, by maintaining it, adopt the worst features of German racial theories. As some people may think this statement exaggerated, the testimony of Lord Morley may be worth quoting, who in his Recollections speaks of the acknowledged point that the main argument of the essay On Liberty was not original, but came from Germany. The problem is not why the Germans as such are vicious, which congenitally they are probably no more than other peoples, but to determine the circumstances which, during the last 70 years, have made possible the progressive growth and the ultimate victory of a particular set of ideas, and why, in the end, this victory has brought the most vicious elements among them to the top. Mere hatred of everything German instead of the particular ideas which now dominate the Germans is, moreover, very dangerous, because it blinds those who indulge in it against a real threat. It is to be feared that this attitude is frequently merely a kind of escapism, caused by an unwillingness to recognize tendencies which are not confined to Germany, and by a reluctance to re-examine, and if necessary to discard, beliefs which we have taken over from the Germans, and by which we are still as much deluded as the Germans were. It is doubly dangerous because the contention that only the peculiar wickedness of the Germans has produced the Nazi system is likely to become the excuse for forcing on us the very institutions which have produced that wickedness. The interpretation of the developments in Germany and Italy about to be proffered in this book is very different from that given by most foreign observers and by the majority of exiles from those countries. But if this interpretation is correct, it will also explain why it is almost impossible for a person who, like most of the exiles and the foreign correspondents of English and American newspapers, holds the now prevalent socialist views to see those events in the proper perspective. The superficial and misleading view, which sees in National Socialism merely a reaction fomented by those whose privileges or interests were threatened by the advance of socialism, was naturally supported by all those who, although they were at one time active in the movement of ideas that has led to National Socialism, have stopped at some point of that development and, by the conflict into which this brought them with the Nazis, were forced to leave their country. But the fact that they were numerically the only significant opposition to the Nazis means no more than that, in the wider sense, practically all Germans had become socialists, and that liberalism, in the old sense, had been driven out by socialism. As we hope to show, the conflict in existence between the National Socialist right and the left in Germany is the kind of conflict that will always arise between rival socialist factions. If this interpretation is correct, it means, however, that many of those socialist refugees, in clinging to their beliefs, are now, though with the best will in the world, helping to lead their adopted country the way which Germany has gone. I know that many of my Anglo-Saxon friends have sometimes been shocked by the semi-fascist views they would occasionally hear expressed by German refugees, whose genuinely socialist convictions could not be doubted. But while these observers put this down to the others being Germans, the true explanation is that they were socialists, whose experience had carried them several stages beyond that yet reached by socialists in England and America. It is true, of course, that German socialists have found much support in their country from certain features of the Prussian tradition, and this kinship between Prussianism and socialism, in which in Germany both sides gloried, gives additional support to our main contention. That there did exist a certain kinship between socialism and the organization of the Prussian state, consciously organized from the top, as in no other country, is undeniable, and was freely recognized already by the early French socialists. Long before the ideal of running the whole state on the same principles as a single factory was to inspire 19th-century socialism, the Prussian poet Novalis had already deplored that no other state has ever been administered so much like a factory as Prussia since the death of Frederick William. Cf. Novalis, Friedrich von Hardenberg, Glauben und Liebe, Oder der König und die Königin, 1798. But it would be a mistake to believe that the specific German, rather than the socialist element, produced totalitarianism. It was the prevalence of socialist views and not Prussianism that Germany had in common with Italy and Russia, and it was from the masses, and not from the classes steeped in the Prussian tradition and favored by it, that National Socialism arose. This audiobook is continued on Disc 2. The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich A. Hayek. Continued. Disc 2. Chapter 1. The Abandoned Road. A program whose basic thesis is not that the system of free enterprise for profit has failed in this generation, but that it has not yet been tried. F.D. Roosevelt. When the course of civilization takes an unexpected turn, when, instead of the continuous progress which we have come to expect, we find ourselves threatened by evils associated by us with past ages of barbarism, we naturally blame anything but ourselves. Have we not all striven according to our best lights, and have not many of our finest minds incessantly worked to make this a better world? Have not all our efforts and hopes been directed toward greater freedom, justice, and prosperity? If the outcome is so different from our aims, if instead of freedom and prosperity, bondage and misery stare us in the face, is it not clear that sinister forces must have foiled our intentions, that we are the victims of some evil power which must be conquered before we can resume the road to better things? However much we may differ when we name the culprit, whether it is the wicked capitalist or the vicious spirit of a particular nation, the stupidity of our elders, or a social system not yet, although we have struggled against it for half a century, fully overthrown, we all are, or at least were until recently, certain of one thing, that the leading ideas which during the last generation have become common to most people of good will and have determined the major changes in our social life cannot have been wrong. We are ready to accept almost any explanation of the present crisis of our civilization except one, that the present state of the world may be the result of genuine error on our own part, and that the pursuit of some of our most cherished ideals has apparently produced results utterly different from those which we expected. While all our energies are directed to bring this war to a victorious conclusion, it is sometimes difficult to remember that even before the war, the values for which we are now fighting were threatened here and destroyed elsewhere. Though for the time being the different ideals are represented by hostile nations fighting for their existence, we must not forget that this conflict has grown out of a struggle of ideas within what not so long ago was a common European civilization, and that the tendencies which have culminated in the creation of the totalitarian systems were not confined to the countries which have succumbed to them.